Let's dive into this, huh? Peter Bregman's 18 Minutes. Find your focus, master distraction, and get the right things done.
Sounds like a plan.
We've got a ton of notes and excerpts here, all about taking back control of our time and energy. I think Bregman's got some answers for us.
Well, he definitely starts off in an interesting place, that's for sure. He doesn't jump right into some system or method. He kind of gets personal.
Oh, like how so?
He talks about hitting this wall in his own life,
Yeah.
super successful but completely unhappy.
Yeah, that whole success doesn't equal happiness thing.
Exactly.
It's a tale as old as time,
Yeah.
right? But how does he turn that into something, I don't know, useful for the rest of us?
Well, he uses this analogy, kind of cool actually. Imagine being launched into the air like on a catapult. You
Yeah.
get that bird's eye view for a second.
yeah.
You can see the whole picture, right? But in our regular lives, we're so caught up in the momentum of everything, we don't ever get that chance to pause.
So how do we do that? Hit the pause button when everything's telling us to go, go, go.
Yeah. That's where the slowing down technique comes in.
Slowing down.
Yeah, it's deceptively simple.
Okay.
So before you react to anything, email, phone call, your boss yelling at you, you just pause for 5 seconds.
5 seconds.
It's like that catapult launch, gives you a moment to actually choose how you want to respond.
I like the idea, but 5 seconds? I don't know. Seems a little impractical, maybe?
It might feel weird at first, for sure.
Yeah.
But think about how often you just react without thinking. Let those emotions take over.
Oh, more often than I'd like to admit, probably.
Those 5 seconds, they could really make a difference.
Right. I'm willing to give it a shot. But speaking of reacting without thinking, what about when our reactions are based on, assumptions, not reality?
Ah, yes, confirmation bias, right. Seeing what we expect to see,
Exactly.
even if it's not really there, which can be, interesting, to say the least. Bregman actually tells this hilarious story about getting frostbite in spring.
Wait, what? Frostbite in spring?
Yeah.
How's that even possible?
He was so sure the weather was warming up, he didn't even check the forecast, went out in shorts and a t-shirt, ended up with numb toes.
Oh, ouch.
It's funny, but kind of scary too, right?
Yeah, definitely a painful lesson.
Shows how easily we can get tripped up by what we want to believe rather than what's actually true.
So how do we avoid those frostbite in spring moments? How do we see the world, I don't know, more clearly?
Well, Bregman suggests actually looking for information that challenges our beliefs.
Even if it's uncomfortable, right?
Yeah, exactly. Being willing to be wrong, being open to being surprised. It's not about being right all the time. It's about making better choices, even if it means admitting we don't have all the answers.
That's pretty humbling, isn't it? To admit we don't know everything.
It is, but think about how freeing that could be.
Yeah, true.
Opens us up to, new possibilities, new perspectives.
Okay, so we're pausing, challenging our assumptions, but what about when our, whole identity gets shaken up?
Oh, you mean
Our work, our jobs. What happens when that changes or disappears completely? Bregman asks a really tough question in the book.
what's that?
Who are you if you take away your job title?
That is a tough one, and probably pretty unsettling for a lot of people.
Definitely.
But important to think about.
Yeah.
Bregman's point is that we need more than one identity, passions outside of work, so we're not completely lost if that one thing changes.
It's like having a backup generator for your sense of self. If the main power goes out, you've got something else to keep you going.
Perfect analogy.
Right.
He tells this story about a friend of his, Paul. This guy loses his high-powered consulting job and ends up, believe it or not, as a spiritual leader at an ashram.
Wow. That's quite a shift.
Right. Not just a career change, but a total transformation of who he was.
So it's less about what do I do and more about who am I, even beyond my job.
Exactly. And that leads right into Bregman's framework for, finding work that actually fits who you are.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
4 elements, he says. Leveraging your strengths, embracing your weaknesses, asserting your differences, and pursuing your passions.
Okay, I'm going to stop you right there. Embracing our weaknesses. I thought the whole point was to overcome them.
That's what we're always told, right?
Yeah.
But Bregman says those weaknesses can actually be strengths.
Really?
Depending on the situation. He uses this example, Captain Sullenberger, the pilot who landed that plane on the Hudson River.
Oh, yeah. Incredible story.
Sullenberger was, obsessed with aviation safety. Some people might see that as a weakness, too focused, too cautious.
Right.
But that's exactly what allowed him to react so perfectly in a crisis, saved everyone on board.
Wow. So it's about seeing those weaknesses through a different lens almost.
Exactly. But how do we figure out which weaknesses to embrace and which ones to actually try to change?
Yeah, good point.
Self-awareness is key there. Being honest with ourselves about what we're good at and what we're not.
Okay, starting to see how these pieces fit together. Embrace our quirks, chase our passions, but how do we turn that into a productive day? Bregman mentions this 18-minute daily plan.
Yeah, it's super simple but really powerful. 5 minutes in the morning to plan your day.
Okay.
Align it with your bigger goals for the year right now. Then 1 minute every hour, just to refocus, make sure you're still on track.
1 minute every hour.
Set a timer, it helps. And then 5 minutes at the end of the day to review, see what worked, what didn't.
I got to say, that 1 minute refocus thing sounds a little gimmicky.
Maybe, but it works. Think about it. How often do we just get swept away by the day? Emails, meetings, putting out fires. We completely lose sight of what we were actually trying to do.
Oh, definitely been there.
Those little 1 minute check-ins or like a reset button bring you back to your priorities.
You know, Brigman tells this story about mountain biking. He kept crashing at this one obstacle over and over. It was only when he started planning ahead, visualizing success, that he finally got past it. I think that's connected to this refocusing idea.
Totally. He was so focused on the obstacle, he was unconsciously hitting the brakes. This 18-minute plan, it's all about bringing those unconscious habits into the light so we can choose where we're putting our energy.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So we've got our plan, we're feeling focused, but then bam, distractions everywhere.
Yeah, they're the worst, aren't they?
How do we deal with those?
Yeah.
Especially in a world that's constantly screaming for our attention.
Well, Bregman's take on distractions is really interesting. He says not all distractions are bad.
Wait, productive distractions, what does that even mean?
He gives this example of like a kid throwing a tantrum. Sometimes distracting them with something else can break that cycle, shift their energy.
Okay, interesting.
So it's not about eliminating all distractions. It's about being strategic, which ones we let in.
Got it. But what about that feeling of being totally scattered, trying to do a million things at once? I know I fall into that trap all the time.
That's switch tasking. And Bregman says it's a killer. We think we're being productive, but we're actually making ourselves less effective. He tells this funny story about trying to multitask during a conference call. It was a disaster.
Oh, I've been there.
We all have.
Trying to answer emails during a meeting, recipe for disaster.
Right. So if multitasking is out, what's the solution?
Yeah, what do we do instead?
Single tasking. Focusing on one thing at a time, giving it your full attention.
Easier said than done, right?
True. And that's where setting boundaries comes in. Learning to say no to things that don't align with your priorities.
Ah, yes, the power of no. Something I definitely need to work on.
It's tough, but Bregman has this 3-question test for evaluating requests.
Okay, hit me.
Ask yourself, is this something only I can do? Is this something I'm passionate about? And does this fit with my goals?
If the answer is no to most of those, it's probably a no to the request, right?
Exactly.
That's helpful. It takes the pressure off feeling like I have to say yes to everything.
And he also talks about how being, like, too nice can actually make setting boundaries harder.
Oh, so?
He tells this story about his daughters ignoring his closed door rule because he wasn't consistent with enforcing it. It shows how important it is to be clear, even if it feels a little uncomfortable at first.
People will adjust, right?
Eventually, yeah. So consistency is key. But what about when it's our own internal resistance that's holding us back? You know, like when we just can't seem to get motivated, especially for those big, scary changes.
Oh, yeah, I know that feeling all too well.
Well, this is where Bregman's take on motivation gets really interesting. He says we actually need less motivation than we think.
Wait, less motivation? I thought that was the whole point, to be more motivated.
He's saying it's more about taking action than waiting for motivation to strike.
Interesting.
He compares it to riding a bike in the rain. Hardest part is getting out the door.
Okay, yeah,
Once you're moving, momentum takes over.
I can definitely relate to that. Sometimes just starting is the hardest part, no matter how excited I am about the project.
Right. And he talks about finding the fun in the process, too. When we enjoy something, we're more likely to stick with it.
That reminds me of the story he tells about training for a triathlon with a friend. They use video games to make the workouts more fun.
Exactly. Gamify it. Make it enjoyable.
Yeah, got to be creative. Okay, so taking action, finding the fun. But what about when we need a little extra push? What about fear as a motivator?
Bregman says fear can be powerful, especially when it comes to avoiding something bad. But he suggests pairing it with noticing the positive results of the change you're making.
So like a positive feedback loop.
Yeah, exactly. Reinforce the good stuff. He talks about watching this scary video about the dangers of using your phone while driving, it freaked him out so much that he finally changed his behavior.
Fear combined with the experience of actually driving distraction-free.
Right, so it's not just avoiding the bad, it's about experiencing the good, too.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. We've covered a lot of ground here. Pausing, challenging our assumptions, even embracing our weaknesses. But life throws us curveballs all the time.
Always.
How do we stay focused and productive when things inevitably don't go according to plan?
That's where Bregman's advice on flexibility comes in.
Flexibility.
Being able to adapt. He says we should see challenges as opportunities, not setbacks.
I like that.
He tells the story about driving through a snowstorm, suddenly had to adjust his driving style, slow down, be more cautious. It's a great metaphor for how we need to approach change in general.
Love that analogy.
Right.
Things rarely go exactly as we expect.
Right.
So we've learned about pausing, challenging our assumptions, even diversifying our identities, and embracing our weaknesses.
A lot to unpack.
So what comes next?
Well, now that we've laid the groundwork, let's actually dive into the nitty-gritty of Bregman's approach to planning our days.
Sounds good to me.
So, where were we? Ah, yes. Planning those days.
Right. Getting down to the nitty-gritty.
Okay, well, Bregman, he suggests this shift in thinking. Instead of trying to do everything, we need to figure out the one thing.
One thing.
I like that. Yeah, the one thing that'll have the biggest impact on our goals.
Okay, so instead of trying to boil the ocean, we got to find that one pebble that makes the biggest ripple.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But easier said than done, right? How do we even figure out what that one thing is with all the demands on our time?
Right. It's easy to get overwhelmed just thinking about it.
Well, Bregman says start with your annual focus, those key areas where you really want to invest your energy.
Okay, so it's not just some random habit we're trying to change. It's got to be connected to our bigger goals.
Right. And he also says start small.
Small. I thought we were thinking big here.
We are. But it's better to pick a tiny habit, something you can actually stick with, than trying to overhaul your whole life overnight.
So it's like a snowball effect. Small changes building up over time.
Exactly. He even gives this example, losing 18 pounds just by cutting out sugar. Didn't change anything else, just that one thing.
Wow, that's impressive. Okay, so we've got our one thing. We're starting small. But how do we make it stick? I mean, we all know how easy it is to fall back into old habits.
Oh, for sure. Bregman says we got to create systems, structures that actually support the change we're trying to make.
So, like, setting ourselves up for success.
Exactly. Think about your environment. How can you design it to make the good habits easier?
Oh, I like that. Working with our environment, not against it.
He gives this example, moving his dining room table outside so his family started eating every meal outdoors.
That's brilliant, making it the path of least resistance.
Right, so we're designing our environment, we're starting small, but what about when motivation just disappears?
Oh yeah, the motivation monster. He gets me every time.
Bregman talks about this idea of acting as if.
Acting as if. Okay, I'm not sure I follow.
So he's saying our actions can actually influence our thoughts and feelings.
Interesting.
He tells this crazy story about getting stung by a hornet while he's driving.
Oh no, that's terrifying.
Right, but instead of freaking out, he forces himself to act calm, like nothing's wrong.
Did it work?
Yeah. By changing his behavior, he actually calmed his anxiety, prevented a full-blown panic attack.
So he's saying we can, like, trick our minds into believing something by behaving as if it were true.
Kind of. It's more about aligning our actions with our desired state. Like, if you want to be more confident, start acting confidently, even if you don't feel it at first.
Fake it till you make it right.
Something like that. But it actually works. Your thoughts and feelings will eventually catch up.
Okay, that's pretty powerful. But what about when it comes to other people? At work, setting boundaries, saying no, all that stuff.
This is where Bregman's emphasis on clear communication really comes in. Being upfront about your availability, setting expectations.
So being proactive, not reactive.
Exactly. He also talks about delegating or deferring tasks instead of trying to do everything yourself.
Oh, the delegation struggle is real.
Isn't it? But it's essential. And then, of course, they're saying no.
Oof, the dreaded no word.
It's tough, but Bregman has those 3 questions, remember?
Only I can do it. Passionate about it, aligns with my goals. Got it.
So if you can't honestly answer yes to at least 2 of those, it's probably a no.
Okay, that's a helpful framework. But what about that feeling of just being overwhelmed by everything? All the information, all the demands coming at us. How do we stay focused in all that noise?
Bregman talks about creating these distraction-free zones.
Distraction-free zones sounds like a dream.
Right, both physically and mentally. carving out time and space where you can actually focus.
So like turning off notifications, putting your phone away, all that good stuff.
That's creating a sanctuary for focused work.
I love that. Building a fortress against the distractions.
Right. Reclaiming control of your attention. And he also talks about being aware of your energy levels, knowing when to take breaks.
Working smarter, not harder.
Exactly. But what about when we need to make those bigger changes, the ones that really push us outside our comfort zones?
Yeah, those are the tough ones.
Bregman says we need to shift our mindset from fear and avoidance to curiosity and experimentation.
So not being fearless, but being curious.
Exactly. Seeing challenges as opportunities for growth, not threats.
Easier said than done, though.
For sure. He tells a story about driving through a sudden snowstorm, had to completely change his driving style, slow down, be super careful. It's a great analogy for how we need to approach change in general.
Love that. Sometimes we have to adjust, course correct.
Right. And he also talks about this idea of getting things half right, like deliberately creating a system or plan that's only partially finished and then getting feedback from others.
Well, that's interesting. So it's like built-in collaboration.
Exactly. You're tapping into other people's expertise and creating something much better than you could have on your own.
It's like embracing imperfection, making the process more fun.
Right. It's not about being perfect. It's about making progress.
And celebrating those small wins along the way.
Yes. Acknowledging how far you've come, no matter how small the steps.
Those little victories can really keep us going.
Totally. So we're embracing failure, celebrating those wins, but ultimately it's about the story we tell ourselves, right? Bregman really emphasizes that.
The story we tell ourselves.
Yeah, like what's the narrative running in your head about who you are and what you're capable of?
He says we can choose to tell ourselves a more empowering story.
Exactly. One that actually supports our goals. He even suggests we act as if we're already that person we want to be.
So by behaving in alignment with our desired identity, we start to believe it.
And then it becomes a reality.
Wow, that's powerful stuff. Taking control of our own narratives.
It all comes down to that. Believing in our own potential and then taking action.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive into 18 minutes, where do we go from here?
Well, we've talked about managing our time, setting goals, even dealing with those pesky distractions. But what about when motivation just completely tanks? When procrastination takes over and we feel stuck?
Ooh, sounds like we're about to get into the real nitty-gritty of this whole productivity thing. Let's do it. All right, so we've talked about setting big goals, putting systems in place. But what about when procrastination just takes over, like completely derails us?
Happens to the best of us.
Oh, yeah. Any advice from Bregman on how to deal with that?
He says a lot of times we get stuck because we're trying to be perfect.
Perfect.
Yeah, we overthink things, overplan, and end up doing nothing at all.
Oh, I know that feeling.
Right. So he actually suggests aiming for good enough.
Good enough. Isn't the goal to be excellent? To like really nail it?
Of course, we want to do our best.
Yeah.
But sometimes perfectionism can really hold us back. Think about it. Have you ever avoided starting a project because you were scared it wouldn't be perfect?
Oh, all the time.
Yeah.
Especially if it's something new.
Right. So by aiming for good enough, we kind of lower the stakes.
Okay.
Makes it easier to just start.
Get the ball rolling.
And once we start, we often find that momentum takes over.
Oh, yeah. I've noticed that.
And the work itself actually becomes more enjoyable.
So it's like shifting our mindset from perfect to progress.
Exactly.
Right.
Instead of waiting for the perfect moment, the perfect plan, we just dive in.
Okay, I like that. But what about when we, mess up, make mistakes? Things don't go according to plan.
Well, Bregman's a big believer in embracing failure.
Embracing failure.
Yeah, as part of the learning process. He actually encourages us to experiment, try new things, knowing we might make mistakes along the way.
So it's not about avoiding failure. It's about seeing it as like a learning opportunity.
Right. He tells this story about learning to play the piano as an adult.
Oh, I tried that once. Didn't go so well.
Well, he was determined to master this really challenging piece.
Okay.
But he kept making mistakes.
Yeah, that's the part I got stuck on.
Right. But instead of getting discouraged, he used those mistakes to improve his technique. He actually learned more from the things he got wrong.
Interesting. So it's like shifting our perspective, seeing those failures as stepping stones.
Exactly. Embracing the process, the ups and downs, knowing that the real growth happens outside our comfort zone.
And celebrating those small wins along the way, right?
Absolutely. Acknowledging how far we've come, no matter how small the steps.
Those little victories can really add up.
They do. So we're embracing failure, celebrating the wins, but But ultimately, it all comes back to the story we're telling
The
ourselves.
story we tell ourselves.
Yeah. Bregman asks this question: what's the story I'm telling myself about who I am and what I'm capable of?
That's a powerful question.
Yeah.
And we can choose to tell ourselves a different story,
Yeah.
a more empowering one.
Exactly. One that supports our goals and aspirations. He even suggests, acting as if we're already that person we want to be.
Oh, right. We talked about that earlier.
By behaving in alignment with that desired identity, we start to believe it.
It becomes our reality.
Powerful stuff. So, as we wrap up our deep dive into Peter Bregman's 18 Minutes, what are some key takeaways, you think?
Well, we've definitely covered a lot of ground here. Practical strategies for managing our time, finding our focus, dealing with distractions. But beyond that, I think the biggest takeaway for me is this idea of living more intentionally, making choices that align with our values and goals, and not being afraid to, step outside our comfort zones and really go after what we want.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's about embracing the journey and being kind to ourselves along the way.
And remember, it all starts with that one thing. What small change can you make today to move you closer to the life you want to live? We challenge you to take action, even if it's just a tiny step, and trust that the momentum will build from there.
Onwards and upwards from
Right,
it.
exactly. Until next time, keep diving deep.